memory be a blessing. We gather to comfort his children and families, his daughters, Lynn and Heidi, their spouses, Paul and Joe, his grandchildren, Adam, Nick and Jack, and Lauren. Sometimes we plan, sometimes are planned for us. Sometimes we yearn for, sometimes we wish never came. In the words of Ecclesiastes, a season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven. A time for dancing, a time for wailing, a time for birthing, a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing. The time of mourning is a complicated time, filled with many emotions and memories, both bitter and sweet. We begin our service with the recitation of Psalms, thus linking Melvin's life with the 3,000-year-old tradition of the people Israel and the eternity of God. As I chant Psalm 121, allow yourself to enter deeply into this moment. The final line links this psalm and prayer to what we're doing at this moment. God guards your coming and your going, now and forever. Shir lamalot esainai el harim me'ayin yavo ezri me'im Adonai oseh shamayim va'aretz al yitain lamot raglecha al yanum shomrecha hine lo yanum velo yishan shomer Yisrael Adonai shomrecha Adonai tzilecha al yad yeminecha yomam hashemesh lo yikeka ve'yareach balayla Adonai yishmorcha mikol ra Yishmor et nafshecha Adonai yishmor tzetecha uvoecha me'ata ve'ad olam. Now we'll share some words and memories about our beloved Melvin. Lynn.
Should I come up? Yeah, sure. Okay. Give me a second. I'll try. Thanks. To me, my dad was tall, personable, and the ladies loved him. And anybody who ever spent time with my dad will remember him for his good looks and love of sports. He made some questionable decisions in his life, but I will always remember him for opening many different types of businesses in his lifetime, and of course for being my dad. My dad was known for getting into mischief from the time he was a kid. Him and his cousin Sandy, who unfortunately couldn't be here because she lives in Florida and is 83 years old, used to sneak into an apple orchard to steal little green apples before being chased out by the owner. Of course, that didn't stop them from continuing to do it time and time again. Over a decade ago, I picked up on my dad forgetting things. Sadly, that was the start of his decreasing memory and inability to do things. My dad was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease, which over the last several years had him swinging between remembering things to forgetting who people were. Seeing my dad's decline was heart-wrenching, and I saw him disappear. I lost my dad a long time ago. He suffered from this disease over the last decade. Today, my dad is in a better place. Thank you for my friends, family, and everyone for being here to remember my dad. After this service, Joe and I are hosting a shiver.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I think my sister and Lynn have a couple of similar memories, so I apologize if this is repetitive. First of all, I want to begin by thanking each of you for coming out today to honor my father and support our family. My dad died 6 days ago, and just like Alzheimer's slow progressing disease, laying him to rest has been a complicated process. Flying his body from Florida to his final resting place besides my mother. The last almost 10 years has been a long, gradual goodbye, as the man and person my dad was once began slowly but surely slipping away. Try as we clung to what was left, made us all at different times feel mad, frustrated, and sad all at the same time. But that's not what I want to remember today or any other day. 87 years old this year. My dad was a self-made man. From climbing over the fence in a Malden apple grove, stealing apples with Mr. Samoli, running after him and his cousin Sussy, cursing all along in Italian, to stealing ice cream in Chelsea with Herbie. He went on, entering the Air Force, stationed in Houston in 1950, and served from 1952 to 1956, suffering a gunshot wound to his right foot. From owning Dunkin' Donuts in Revere, Kenny and Sullivan's and a dry cleaners in Chelsea, Colonial Meat Market in Swampscott, to Prospect Buffet in Cambridge. He turned into quite the businessman. I wrote this eulogy mostly while sitting with my dad virtually through Google Duo, playing music and chatting about pretty much nothing and everything. Everybody who knows me knows I'll talk. My dad had a few notable features that always stood out. The first was his height. He was well over 6 feet tall. His grandsons are obviously following in his footsteps, shrinking as he got older. His long legs had him walking fast, as we all had to keep up with him and Edie. As a little girl, his towering presence could often be intimidating, but he was actually a kind and gentle person. Unless you got him angry, then you were in trouble and you better run. The other striking feature was his eyes. He had one gray eye and one green eye. And even on my father's deathbed, his skin was wrinkle-free and smooth. He had no dentures. He had no hearing aids. He had no artificial parts except his pacemaker. Pretty damn good for 87 years old. One of my favorite childhood memories was sitting at my father's knees as a little girl, watching and often attending the Boston Celtics games and watching the New England Patriots as well on Sundays. My obsessive love for the Celtics in particular started with my dad and continues to this day, as we would both think we were playing in the game, jumping around, waving our arms, thinking we were right there in it, with my dad even knocking over a hanging lamp during one game, to the point my mother would come running in asking, "What are the two of you doing destroying the den? The two of you shouldn't be allowed to watch together." For Lynn, her love of the Boston Red Sox also began with my dad. The relationship between a daughter and her father can often be complicated, and for me, it was, as I recognized that as much as I loved my daddy, I acknowledged his weaknesses as a person and a man. But once I accepted those flaws, my relationship became simple and loving most of the time. Our core family of 5, my beloved mother, Shirley, my dad, my sisters Lynn and Edie, and myself were filled with love and laughter growing up. Losing our mother 23 years ago was, and still is, such a profound loss. Losing Edie in such a tragic way was another heartbreaking loss that is often impossible to still comprehend and never completely recover from. And I know my dad's mind absolutely, positively did not. Now, losing my dad, although anticipated and inevitable, as I've been saying goodbye to him for years, as his Alzheimer's and dementia progressed, still does not now lessen the sadness and grief I feel losing my last surviving parent and linked to my own childhood. My wonderful children, my father's 4 grandchildren, love their papa, Lauren, living in Australia. I love you, Lauren. Making sure to FaceTime her papa at least once a week. Adam, who learned to be a card shark from my dad, and my dad will be most certainly counting cards up in heaven. They better watch out. To Nick and Jack, who got to travel with my dad, especially with Edie on fun holidays, who I know don't have as many memories since my dad embraced Florida living many years ago. The sadness that I know now will stay with me for the rest of my life, but I am relieved that he is finally at peace. Rest now, Dad.
Thank you. Melvin Black was born on August 20th, 1935 in Chelsea, Massachusetts. He was a part of the large Jewish community in Chelsea and grew up going to synagogue. He also grew up helping his family, as things were not always easy in those days. He graduated from Chelsea High School and went on to the University of Houston, where he was stationed in the Air Force. He fought in the Korean War, serving in a watchtower, and was very proud of that experience. It shaped who he was. He met his first wife, Shirley, after returning, and they married April 19, 1960. They were together for 40 years before Shirley's passing to cancer at only 67. Even though Melvin remarried, he always loved her very much and wanted his final resting place to be here with her. Melvin, as you heard, was an accomplished businessman owning many ventures, including a Dunkin' Donuts, meat shop, dry cleaner, and several bars. He was a great provider for his family and also helped out his parents when times were tough in the early years. Success allowed him to move his family from Chelsea eventually to Marblehead, despite his humble beginnings. A self-made man throughout his working years, he retired from owning a bar in Cambridge on Prospect Street. He loved Boston sports and passed that on to his daughters and probably his grandchildren too, right? He also loved Florida and the sun, and we do have a little bit of sun today in his honor, and has called it home for the last several years of his life. I got to spend some time with Lauren, and she told me some wonderful stories about how he would get her up early to walk, very, very early, and then they would get ready very early to go to dinner at the early bird specials. He came back to visit in the summers and especially enjoyed staying with his daughters and visiting his grandchildren. Lauren and Adam benefited from his love of card games as the card shark, and they learned gin rummy along with tricks and cheats, how to count cards, his specialty. He also taught Lauren to always hollow out her bagels, which she still does today. She wanted everyone to know that. They shared half moon cookies in Florida, where I'm from. They call them black and white. And he split up the chocolate parts for Lauren and the vanilla for Adam. Melvin had a strong Boston accent and gave his advice with a pointed finger. You listen to me. Judaism was very important to him, and he continued to go to synagogue weekly, even in his retirement. He also loved exercising, walked very fast, and was enthusiastic on the dance floor and Zumba classes. He loved his family, his daughters, his grandchildren, friends, and companions. Through it all, he had a huge smile that would light up the room and every photograph. That is the sight that his family will miss the most. We continue with the memorial prayer. El Malay Rachamim Shochen Bameromim Hamsem Menucha Nechona Hamsem Menucha Nechona Tachat Kanafei HaShekhinah במעלות קדושים וטהורים כזוהר הרקיע מסעירים את נשמת משי בן רזל שהלך לעולמו בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו ענה בעל הרחמים הסירהו בסתר כנפיך לעולמים וצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו אדוני הוא נחלתו וינוע בשלום על משכבו ונאמר אמן El Malay Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant infinite rest in your sheltering presence among the holy and pure to the soul of Melvin Black, who is gone to his eternal home. Merciful One, we ask that our loved one find perfect peace in your eternal embrace. May his soul be bound up in the bond of life. May he rest in peace. And let us say,
Amen.
Amen. At this time, we will take turns helping to complete the mitzvah of burial. This tradition is an act of hesed, of pure kindness and an honor. And all those who are capable and willing should be encouraged to come forward and place 3 shovelfuls of earth gently into the grave. The first shovelful will be upside down to show that we are not glad to do this mitzvah, and then the 2 consecutive shovelful will be right side up because we do need to complete the mitzvah. The family will begin